Hashtag, Your Weapons Have Kickback? Part 1. The shuttle descended through the docking bay of Voris Station with a soft hum, and Commander Idris Okonkwo watched through the viewport as alien figures gathered below to receive them. This was the moment humanity had waited 3 decades to reach, and she was not going to let her species down. The station was massive, a spinning wheel of metal and light that hung in the darkness between stars, and it served as neutral ground for the 12 species of the Galactic Concord. Today, it would host humanity's first formal military evaluation, and everything depended on making the right impression. "Commander, we are cleared for landing," the pilot announced, and Idris nodded once before turning to face her team. Sergeant Marcus Chen stood at attention, his battle rifle secured across his chest, and beside him waited Gunnery Sergeant Amara Diallo with her massive anti-materiel rifle strapped to her back. Behind them stood 6 more soldiers, each carrying the standard weapons of Earth's unified military forces. "Remember why we are here," Idris said, her voice calm but firm. "The Concord has rejected our membership 3 times because they think we are too primitive and too aggressive. Today, we show them what humanity truly is, and we do it with dignity." The soldiers nodded, and the shuttle touched down with barely a tremor. The ramp lowered, and Idris was the first to step onto alien metal. The air smelled strange, filtered and recycled through systems designed for species that were not human, but she kept her face neutral as she surveyed the welcoming party. There were perhaps 20 aliens waiting for them, and Idris had studied their species during the long journey to this station. She recognized the tall insectoid forms of the Velthari with their shimmering carapaces of blue and green, and she saw the squat muscular bodies of the Korath, who served as station security, and she noted the floating spherical forms of the Mindori, who communicated through flashing lights. At the front of the group stood the tallest Velthari she had ever seen, his carapace a deep royal purple that marked him as high-born among his people. This was High Arbiter Thesic Valkren, the leader of this evaluation, and the alien who would decide if humanity was worthy of joining galactic civilization. "Welcome to Voris Station," Thesic said, his mandibles clicking in a way that the translator rendered as formal greeting. "I am High Arbiter Thesic Valkren, and I speak for the Galactic Concord in this matter." "I am Commander Idris Okonkwo of the United Nations ship Perseverance," she replied, keeping her voice steady, "and I thank you for this opportunity to demonstrate humanity's capabilities." Thesic's compound eyes shifted to look at the soldiers behind her, and something that might have been amusement flickered across his alien features. His gaze lingered on the weapons they carried, and his mandibles clicked in a pattern the translator identified as curiosity mixed with condescension. "These are your weapons?" he asked, gesturing with one slender limb toward Chen's rifle. "May I examine one?" Idris hesitated for only a moment before nodding to Chen, and the sergeant stepped forward to present his rifle for inspection. Thesic took it carefully, and turning it over in his hands with the delicate precision of someone handling a museum artifact. "Fascinating," the arbiter said, and his tone made clear that he did not mean it as a compliment. "Chemical propellant, if I am not mistaken. You ignite an explosive compound to accelerate a metal projectile through this tube." "That is correct," Idris confirmed. Thesic handed the rifle back to Chen, and when he spoke again, his voice carried open mockery that made several of his fellow Velthari click their mandibles in laughter. "Your weapons have kickback?" he asked. "You fight with controlled explosions held in your hands?" The laughter spread among the alien delegation, and Idris felt heat rise in her cheeks, but kept her expression controlled. Beside her, she could sense Chen's jaw tightening with suppressed anger. "How quaint," Thesic continued. "How wonderfully primitive. The Concord abandoned such crude technology more than 10,000 years ago when we discovered that recoilless energy weapons were superior in every way." He gestured to one of the Korath guards, who stepped forward holding a sleek silver device that looked more like a piece of art than a weapon. It had no barrel, no trigger guard, and no visible mechanism at all. "This is a standard Concord plasma caster," Thesic explained. "It fires contained bolts of superheated gas with perfect accuracy and zero recoil. The user feels nothing but a gentle warmth, and the weapon never jams, never needs ammunition, and never fails." He turned back to Idris. And his compound eyes glittered with something between pity and contempt. "Your species still relies on metal tubes and explosive powder," he said. "This is why the Concord has hesitated to accept humanity. Your technology is simply too far behind our own, and your methods of warfare are too brutal for civilized species." Idris took a slow breath, and when she spoke, her voice was ice. "With respect, High Arbiter, I would ask that you reserve judgment until you have seen our weapons in action." Thesic's mandibles clicked in surprise at her boldness, and for a moment he simply stared at her with those massive compound eyes. Then he made a gesture that the translator identified as reluctant agreement. "Very well, Commander," he said. "We have prepared a testing range where both your weapons and ours can be demonstrated. You will have your chance to impress us, though I confess I do not see how explosions and metal can compete with plasma and precision." He turned and began walking toward the interior of the station, and his delegation fell into step behind him. Idris followed, her team close at her back. As they walked through gleaming corridors filled with alien technology beyond human understanding, Sergeant Chen moved up beside her and spoke in a low voice. "Permission to speak freely, Commander?" "Granted." "That bug has no idea what he is dealing with," Chen said, and there was a hard edge to his words. "He thinks our weapons are primitive because they kick. He does not understand what that kick means." Idris allowed herself the smallest of smiles. "Then we will teach him," she said. "We will teach them all." The testing range waited ahead, and with it the chance to show the galaxy that humanity's so-called primitive weapons were not a weakness, but a strength. The aliens had mocked the kickback without understanding the simple truth that every soldier knew in their bones. The recoil was not a flaw to be engineered away. It was a promise, a covenant between the weapon and the warrior, and it meant that something terrible was about to happen to whatever stood on the other end. The Galactic Concord had never faced an enemy that used kinetic weapons in war, and they had grown comfortable with their clean and elegant technology. Today they would learn that elegance meant nothing when you needed to put something down and make absolutely certain it would never get back up. Humanity had not survived Earth by being elegant, and they had not clawed their way to the stars by being gentle. They had done it through stubborn determination and overwhelming force, and if the Concord wanted to see what that meant in practice, Commander Idris Okonkwo was more than happy to show them. The demonstration was about to begin, and the galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. The testing range was enormous, a chamber carved into the heart of Voris Station with walls of reinforced alloy designed to contain the most powerful weapons the Concord had ever created. Observation platforms lined the upper level where dozens of alien officials had gathered to watch the demonstration, and their colorful forms shifted and murmured as they waited for the show to begin. Commander Okonkwo stood at the firing line beside High Arbiter Thesic, and before them stretched a row of test targets made from synthetic material designed to mimic organic tissue. Each dummy was shaped roughly like a bipedal creature, featureless and pale, waiting to receive whatever violence the day would bring. "We shall begin with a demonstration of conquered weaponry," Thesic announced, his voice carrying through speakers mounted throughout the chamber. "Officer Krell, if you would be so kind." A Velthari soldier stepped forward, his carapace a muted green that marked him as military caste, and in his hands he carried one of the elegant plasma casters that Thesic had shown them earlier. He moved with the fluid grace of someone who had trained with the weapon for decades, and when he raised it to aim, there was no wasted motion. The plasma caster hummed, and a bolt of blue-white fire leaped from its barrel to strike the first target. The impact was almost silent, just a soft hiss as superheated gas burned through synthetic flesh, and when the light faded, there was a perfect circular hole in the dummy's chest. The aliens on the observation platform clicked and chirped their approval, and Officer Krell fired twice more in rapid succession. Each shot was identical to the first, precise and clean, leaving neat cauterized wounds that barely disturbed the surrounding material. "You see," Thesic said, turning to Idris with obvious pride, "perfect accuracy, instant cauterization to prevent bleeding, and absolutely no recoil to disturb the shooter's aim. This is what civilized warfare looks like." Idris nodded politely but said nothing. And beside her, Sergeant Chen was already stepping forward with his M7 battle rifle. The weapon looked crude next to the sleek plasma caster, all black metal and sharp angles, and several of the watching aliens made sounds that the translator identified as contempt. "You may proceed when ready," Thesic said, and there was amusement in his clicking mandibles. Chen planted his feet, brought the rifle to his shoulder, and took a breath. Idris saw his finger move to the trigger, and she braced herself for what came next. The rifle roared. The sound was unlike anything the aliens had ever heard, a thunderclap of chemical violence that echoed off the metal walls and made the observation platform shake. Several Velthari covered their compound eyes against the muzzle flash. Inanda Mindori's lights flickered in what might have been panic. The target did not have a hole in it anymore. It had a crater. The bullet had struck center mass, punched through the synthetic tissue, tumbled as it traveled, and exited out the back in a spray of material that painted the wall behind it. The dummy's entire torso was simply gone, replaced by a ragged wound the size of a human head. Silence fell over the chamber, broken only by the soft sound of debris settling. Chen cycled the bolt without a word and fired again, and the second dummy exploded the same way the first had. He fired a third time, a fourth, a fifth, and each shot was a declaration of violence that left nothing but destruction in its wake. When the magazine was empty, 5 targets had been reduced to ruins, as and the aliens on the observation platform had stopped making any sound at all. Thesic stared at the destruction with compound eyes that seemed unable to process what they were seeing. His mandibles worked silently, clicking against each other in a pattern the translator could not identify. "That," he finally managed, "that is not possible." "Gunnery Sergeant Diallo," Idris said calmly, "please demonstrate the M82. Amara Diallo stepped forward, and the weapon she carried made Chen's rifle look like a toy. The M82 anti-materiel rifle was nearly as long as she was tall, a massive thing of steel and purpose that had been designed to destroy vehicles and fortifications. She dropped to one knee, settled the rifle's bipod on a support stand, and took aim at a fresh target. The aliens watched with something that might have been fear as she wrapped her finger around the trigger. The M82 spoke, and it spoke with the voice of thunder. The recoil slammed back into Diallo's shoulder with enough force to bruise bone, but she was braced for it and absorbed the impact without moving. The bullet crossed the testing range in less than a heartbeat and struck the target with devastating force. The dummy did not just have a hole in it. The dummy simply ceased to exist from the waist up, and the projectile continued through the reinforced backstop behind it with barely any loss of momentum. There was a shriek of tearing metal, and emergency lights began to flash as the station's systems detected a hull breach. "Minor breach in secondary plating," a mechanical voice announced. "Automated repair systems engaging." Thesic turned to Idris, and for the first time since they had met, there was no mockery in his eyes. "Your weapon," he said slowly. "Just penetrated armor rated for micrometeorite impacts." "Yes," Idris replied, "it did." The arbiter's mandibles clicked in a pattern the translator identified as profound shock, and he turned to stare at the ruined targets once more. The contrast between the clean surgical holes of the plasma caster and the catastrophic destruction of the human weapons could not have been more stark. "Why?" Thesic asked, and his voice was barely above a whisper. "Why would any species create such things?" Idris stepped forward until she stood beside the Velthari, and when she spoke, her voice carried to every listener in the chamber. "Because we had to," she said. "That's because our world gave us no choice." She gestured to Chen and Diallo, to the weapons they carried, to the devastation those weapons had wrought. "You asked why our weapons have kickback," she continued. "You laughed at us for using controlled explosions, but you did not ask what we needed to kill or why we needed to kill it so completely." Thesic's compound eyes fixed on her, and she could see the questions burning behind them. "Your plasma weapons are elegant," Idris said. "They are precise and clean and civilized, but they were designed by species that never faced the horrors we faced, never fought enemies that required total destruction to stop." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Earth is what the galaxy calls a death world," she said. "Gravity so heavy it crushes most species, predators in every environment, and prey animals that fight back with enough force to kill. Humans did not evolve as the apex predators of our planet, Arbiter." She looked at the ruined targets, at the holes punched through reinforced metal, at the evidence of humanity's capacity for violence. "We evolved as persistence hunters," she said. "We evolved to chase things until they collapsed, and then to kill them so thoroughly they could never threaten us again. Our weapons have kickback because we wanted the power behind that kick, the promise that whatever we hit would stay down forever." Thesic said nothing for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice had lost all trace of mockery. "I believe," he said slowly, "that I have greatly underestimated your species." Somewhere above them, the observation platform had gone completely silent. And every alien in the chamber was staring at the human soldiers with new eyes. The demonstration had achieved exactly what Idris had hoped. The galaxy was beginning to understand what humanity truly was. The conference room aboard Voris Station was designed for species of many shapes and sizes, with seating that could adjust to accommodate anything from the massive bulk of a Korath to the delicate frames of the Mindori. Commander Okonkwo sat at one end of the central table, flanked by her officers, while High Arbiter Thesic and his delegation filled the other seats. The mood had shifted dramatically since the demonstration, and the aliens who had laughed at human weapons now regarded them with wary respect. But respect was not the same as understanding. And Thesic had demanded explanations before they could proceed any further. "I must know," the Arbiter said, his mandibles clicking in a rhythm that suggested deep thought. "Why your species developed in this way? The Concord has studied hundreds of intelligent races, and none of them created weapons designed for such overwhelming destruction." Idris nodded to the woman seated on her right, a small figure with sharp eyes, and the insignia of a scientific officer on her uniform. "This is Dr. Yuki Tanaka," Idris said, "our ship's xenobiologist and expert on comparative evolution. She can explain what you are asking." Tanaka stood and moved to the display screen at the head of the room, and with a few touches, she brought up an image of Earth rotating slowly in the darkness of space. "What you are looking at is humanity's homeworld," she began, her voice calm and measured. "And it is classified by galactic standards as a Category 5 death world." Murmurs rippled through the alien delegation, and several of them shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "Category 5? One of the Korath rumbled, "That is the highest classification. Worlds in that category are considered uninhabitable by civilized species. And yet humans evolved there," Tanaka said. "Not just evolved, but thrived. To understand why our weapons are what they are, you must first understand what Earth is." She touched the screen again, and statistics began scrolling beside the image of the blue planet. "Earth's gravity is approximately 1 g," she said. which is nearly double what most Concord species evolved under. This means that everything on our world is denser, stronger, and more resilient than you might expect. She switched to an image of a grassy plain with mountains in the distance, and even in the static picture there was something wild and dangerous about the landscape. Our planet has extreme temperature variations, violent weather patterns, and ecosystems that are in constant competition, she continued. Every environment on Earth contains predators, from the deepest oceans to the highest mountains. There is nowhere on our world that is truly safe. The display changed to show a series of creatures, and the aliens leaned forward with horrified fascination. There were great cats with teeth like knives, sharks with rows of serrated jaws, bears that stood taller than a Korath, and insects that carried enough venom to kill 100 Velthari. These are some of Earth's predators, Tanaka said. And humans had to survive among them with no natural weapons. We have no claws, no fangs, no venom, and no armor. Our bodies are soft and slow compared to the things that hunted us. Then how did you survive? Thesic asked, and there was genuine curiosity in his voice. Tanaka smiled, and it was not a comforting expression. We survived because we refused to die, she said. Humans evolved as persistence hunters, which means we did not need to be faster or stronger than our prey. We simply needed to keep going longer. She pulled up an image of early humans on a savanna, carrying primitive spears and tracking animals across endless grassland. A human can walk and run for days without stopping, she explained. We can carry water and food with us. We can track prey over incredible distances. And we can keep moving long after other species would have collapsed. Our ancestors would chase animals until those animals literally fell over from exhaustion, and then we would kill them. That is monstrous, one of the Velthari whispered. That is survival, Tanaka corrected. And it shaped everything about how we think and how we fight. Humans do not engage in combat expecting to win quickly. We engage expecting the fight to be long and brutal and painful, and we prepare accordingly. She switched to medical diagrams showing human anatomy, with various systems highlighted in different colors. Human bodies have several unusual features that most galactic species lack, she said. We have extremely high pain tolerance, which allows us to continue functioning even with serious injuries. We have an adrenaline response that increases our strength and speed in moments of danger, and we have a psychological capacity for violence that can be activated and deactivated as needed. Sergeant Chen spoke up from his seat, his voice flat and matter-of-fact. I once saw a soldier take a piece of shrapnel through his leg and keep fighting for 20 minutes before he even noticed he was bleeding, he said. Humans can ignore pain when we need to. We can push our bodies past what should be possible because our minds refuse to accept that we are beaten. Thesic's compound eyes fixed on Chen with something like awe. Your species fights through wounds that would incapacitate any member of the Concord, he said slowly. And your weapons are designed to deal with enemies that have the same capability. Exactly, Idris said, leaning forward. Oh, you asked why our weapons have kickback. The answer is that we needed weapons powerful enough to stop things that would not stop otherwise. She stood and walked to the display, standing beside Tanaka as she addressed the alien delegation. Your plasma weapons are wonderful for precise elimination, she said. They create clean wounds that cauterize instantly. But what happens when you fight an enemy that does not stop when wounded? An enemy that keeps coming even with holes burned through its body? The aliens exchanged uncertain glances, and Idris could see that the question troubled them. Human weapons are not designed to wound, she said. They are designed to destroy. We do not trust that a single clean hole will stop a threat, because on Earth it often would not. Our weapons deliver massive kinetic energy that breaks bones, ruptures organs, and makes absolutely certain that the target cannot continue fighting. Dr. Tanaka nodded in agreement. The recoil you mocked is the price of that power, she said. But humans are strong enough to handle it because we evolved under heavy gravity and built our muscles accordingly. What feels like brutal kickback to you is simply normal feedback to us." Thesic was silent for a long moment, his mandibles working as he processed everything he had heard. Finally, he rose from his seat and walked to the window that overlooked the stars. "The Concord has been at peace for 3,000 years, he said quietly. "We have small conflicts, territorial disputes, and occasional raids from species like the Raxith, but we have not faced true war in living memory." He turned back to face the humans, and his compound eyes reflected the starlight. "We designed our weapons for precision because precision was all we needed," he said. "We never considered that there might be enemies who required overwhelming force, enemies who could not be stopped with clean surgical strikes." "Now you understand," Idris said. "Humanity comes from a world where overwhelming force was the only way to survive. We do not fight like the conquered because we could never afford to." Before Thesic could respond, the station shuddered beneath their feet, and emergency alarms began blaring throughout the chamber. Red lights flashed on every surface, and a mechanical voice announced words that made every alien in the room freeze with terror. "Alert! Alert! Raxith war swarm detected. Multiple hull breaches on levels 7 through 12. All personnel to emergency stations." Idris looked at Thesic, and in that moment all the differences between their species fell away. "It seems," she said, reaching for her sidearm, "that we will have a chance to show you what human weapons can really do." The Arbiter nodded grimly, and together they ran toward the sounds of battle. The corridors of Voris Station had become a nightmare of flashing emergency lights and screaming alarms, and Commander Okonkwo ran through the chaos with her team close behind. Beside her High Arbiter, Thesic kept pace on his long legs, his elegant robes billowing as he moved. "What are the Raxith?" Idris demanded as they turned a corner and nearly collided with a group of fleeing station workers. "Hive creatures," Thesic replied, his voice tight with fear. "They attack in swarms of hundreds, sometimes thousands. Each drone is connected to the hive mind and feels no individual pain or fear. They do not stop until they are completely destroyed." Idris felt a cold smile spread across her face. "Enemies that do not stop until destroyed," she said. "We know how to deal with those." They burst through a security checkpoint and found themselves facing a wall of Korath guards who had formed a defensive line across the corridor. Beyond them, Idris could hear the sounds of plasma fire and something else, a horrible chittering screech that made her skin crawl. "The swarm has breached the outer sections," a Korath officer reported, his voice barely audible over the noise. "We are holding them at this junction, but they keep coming. Our weapons wound them, but they do not stay down." "How many?" Idris asked. 300 at least, and possibly more. They came through the hull in multiple locations and have been spreading through the lower levels ever since." Idris turned to her team, and every soldier met her eyes with steady determination. "This is what we trained for," she said. "Sergeant Chen, take Fire Team Alpha and reinforce this position. Gunnery Sergeant Diallo, you are with me on Fire Team Bravo. We will push forward and establish a secondary line." "Commander," Thesic said, and there was something almost pleading in his voice. "The Raxith are not like anything you have faced. They are relentless and fearless, and they never retreat." Idris checked her sidearm and chambered around with a satisfying click. "Good," she said. "Neither do we." She moved past the Korath line and got her first look at the enemy, and for a moment even her trained composure faltered. For the Raxith were nightmares made flesh, creatures of chitin and claw that moved with horrible speed through the corridor ahead. Their bodies were roughly humanoid but covered in armored plates, and their faces were nothing but mandibles and multifaceted eyes that gleamed with alien hunger. A wave of them surged forward, and the Korath opened fire with their plasma casters. Blue-white bolts struck the lead Raxith and burned holes through their carapaces, but the creatures barely slowed. Even with chunks of their bodies missing, they kept coming, driven by the hive mind that felt no pain and knew no fear. "They just keep moving," one of the Korath shouted, panic creeping into his voice. "Nothing stops them." "Fall back behind us," Idris commanded. "Humans, weapons free." Her team moved forward in a practiced formation. Diane, when the first Raxith came within range, Sergeant Chen opened fire with his battle rifle. The sound was deafening in the enclosed corridor, each shot a thunderclap of violence that echoed off the metal walls. The effect was immediate and devastating. Unlike the plasma bolts that burned clean holes through the Raxith, the kinetic rounds tore them apart. The first drone that Chen hit simply exploded from the waist up, its armored body no match for the tumbling bullet that transferred all its energy in a fraction of a second. The creature behind it took the second round through its head and dropped like a puppet with cut strings, its central nervous system destroyed beyond any possibility of function. "Keep firing!" Idris shouted, and her team obeyed. The corridor became a slaughterhouse as human weapons did what they were designed to do. Their Private Torres swept his shotgun across the oncoming swarm, and each blast of tungsten flechettes shredded multiple drones into clouds of chitin and ichor. Corporal Yamamoto fired controlled bursts from her rifle, placing each shot where it would cause maximum destruction. And through it all, the steady thunder of Chen's weapon kept rhythm like the heartbeat of war. The Raxith kept coming, climbing over the bodies of their fallen to reach the humans, but they were dying faster than they could advance. The hive mind that controlled them had never encountered weapons like these, had never faced enemies who dealt in such absolute destruction. "Push forward," Idris commanded, and her team began to advance, stepping over the ruined bodies of drones they had killed. And behind them, the Korath guards watched with expressions of shocked disbelief. They fought their way through 2 more corridors, leaving trails of destruction in their wake, until they reached a junction where the fighting was heaviest. A group of station security officers had barricaded themselves behind overturned equipment, and they were being overwhelmed by Raxith that poured through a breach in the wall. "Diallo," Idris said, "clear that breach." Gunnery Sergeant Diallo stepped forward with her massive rifle, took aim at the hole in the wall where drones were still pouring through, and fired. The round punched through the first Raxith, through the second, through the third, and buried itself in the hull plating beyond. The bodies of the creatures it had passed through collapsed in pieces. She fired again and again. Each shot a declaration that nothing alive could pass through that opening and survive. Behind them, more humans arrived. Fire Team Charlie led by Lieutenant Park, and they spread out to secure the junction. Within minutes, the tide had turned, and the Raxith advance had become a Raxith retreat, but the swarm was not finished. "Commander," Chen shouted, "they are heading for the medical bay. There are wounded and civilians trapped there." Idris did not hesitate. "Chen, hold this position," she ordered. "Diallo, Park, with me." They ran through corridors that grew increasingly damaged, past scorch marks and claw gouges, and the occasional body of a station worker who had not escaped in time. The sounds of battle grew louder. And when they rounded the final corner, Idris saw a scene from a nightmare. At least 50 Raxith had surrounded the medical bay entrance, and the handful of Velthari guards trying to defend it were being overwhelmed. Their plasma weapons were having some effect, but not enough, and even as Idris watched, one of the guards went down under a pile of chitinous bodies. "Covering fire!" Idris shouted, and she raised her sidearm and began to shoot. The handgun was smaller than the rifles her soldiers carried, but it was still a human weapon, and each round that struck a Raxith left catastrophic damage. She fired until the magazine was empty, reloaded in a motion that took less than 2 seconds, and kept firing. Diallo set up her rifle at the end of the corridor and began methodically destroying every drone that tried to approach from the rear. And Lieutenant Park and his team engaged the main swarm with everything they had, and the noise was overwhelming, a constant roar of gunfire that drowned out even the screaming alarms. The Raxith fought with mindless determination, but they were being torn apart faster than they could attack. Their hive mind tried to adapt, tried to find some weakness in the human line, but there was none. The humans were as relentless as they were, and far more destructive. When the last drone fell, Idris stood in a corridor, ankle-deep in alien remains, her weapon smoking in her hand. Around her, the medical bay survivors emerged from their shelter, with expressions of stunned gratitude. A young Velthari, barely more than a child by their species standards, looked up at her with compound eyes that reflected the emergency lights. "You saved us," they said. Their mandibles clicking in a pattern the translator identified as profound thanks. "How did you do that? How did you stop them when our weapons could not?" Idris looked at the destruction around her, at the price of victory written in chitin and blood, and she thought about how to explain it to someone who had never known what it meant to fight for survival. "We come from a world where everything is trying to kill us," she said finally. "We learned a long time ago that the only way to survive is to be more dangerous than anything else." She holstered her weapon and put a hand on the young Velthari's shoulder. "The Raxith do not feel fear," she said, "but they should learn to. Today they met humanity, and humanity does not lose." Somewhere in the station, the last pockets of drones were being hunted down by human soldiers. And the war swarm that had terrorized the Galactic Concord for centuries was learning a terrible lesson. Some prey fought back. The battle for Voris Station ended 6 hours after it began, and in its wake, the corridors were filled with the sounds of repair drones and the quiet murmurs of survivors counting their losses. Commander Idris Okonkwo walked through the damaged sections with High Arbiter Thesic at her side, and neither of them spoke for a long time. The evidence of the fighting was everywhere, from the scorched walls where plasma fire had struck to the much more dramatic damage left by human weapons. In several places, the corridor floors were stained dark with Raxith ichor, and maintenance crews were still working to clear the remains of drones that had been torn apart by kinetic rounds. 47, Thesic said finally. Breaking the silence that had stretched between them, Idris looked at him with a question in her eyes. 47 Concord personnel died in this attack, the Arbiter continued, his voice heavy with grief. Station workers, security officers, and civilians who could not reach shelter in time. The Raxith claimed 47 lives before they were stopped. He paused, and his compound eyes turned to study her face. "How many humans died?" he asked. Idris held his gaze without flinching. "None," she said. Thesic made a sound that the translator could not interpret, something between a laugh and a sob, and he turned away to stare at the damaged wall. "None," he repeated. 300 Raxith drones breached this station, the largest swarm we have seen in decades. And your people killed every single one of them without losing a single soldier." "We had injuries," Idris said. "Sergeant Chen took a claw wound to his arm, and Private Torres has a fractured rib from close combat, but our medics are confident everyone will make full recoveries." "A claw wound and a fractured rib," Thesic said, and there was wonder in his voice. "Against a force that should have killed them all. Against creatures that have terrorized the Concord for 3,000 years. He turned back to face her, and his posture had changed. The arrogance she had seen when they first met was completely gone, replaced by something that looked very much like humility. "I owe you an apology, Commander," he said. "When you arrived at this station, I looked at your weapons and saw only primitive technology. I saw the recoil and the noise and the crude mechanics, and I thought your species was too far behind us to be useful allies." He lowered his head in a gesture the translator identified as deep shame. "I was a fool," he continued. "I judged your tools without understanding the hands that wielded them, and I dismissed your methods without considering why you had developed them. Today I learned the cost of that arrogance." Idris considered his words carefully before responding. The Concord has been at peace for a very long time, she said. Your species developed advanced technology and spread across the galaxy without ever facing true existential threat. It is natural that you would value elegance over power when power seemed unnecessary. She gestured at the damage around them, at the evidence of violence that had transformed this section of the station into a war zone. Humanity never had that luxury, she said. Every generation of our species has faced enemies that could destroy us completely. From the predators that hunted us on Earth to the wars we fought among ourselves, we learned to value whatever worked, regardless of how elegant it looked. They continued walking, passing through a junction where a group of Velthari engineers were working to repair a critical power conduit. The workers stopped to stare at Idris as she passed, and she saw something in their compound eyes that had not been there before. Fear, yes, but also respect. The Concord must know about this, Thesic said as they entered a lift that would take them to the observation deck. Oh, the other species must understand what humanity is capable of. This changes everything. What do you mean? Idris asked. The lift doors opened, and Thesic stepped out onto the observation deck with its sweeping view of the stars. He walked to the window and stood in silence for a moment before answering. The Concord rejected humanity's membership application 3 times, he said. We cited your primitive technology and aggressive psychology, and we believed we were protecting ourselves from a dangerous and unstable species. He turned to face her, and his mandibles clicked in a pattern the translator identified as determination. I was wrong, he said. The Concord was wrong. We do not need protection from humanity. We need humanity's protection from threats we have grown too comfortable to face. Idris joined him at the window, and together they looked out at the infinite darkness beyond the glass. The Raxith have plagued us for centuries, Thesic continued. We have never found a way to defeat them permanently because our weapons are not designed for the kind of absolute destruction they require. We wound them, and they keep coming. We kill them, and more replace them, and slowly they have been pushing deeper into conquered territory. His compound eyes met hers, and she saw the weight of 3,000 years of history in that alien gaze. But your weapons, he said, your weapons do not wound. They destroy. They obliterate. They make absolutely certain that whatever they hit cannot threaten anyone ever again. That is what the Concord needs. Are you saying what I think you are saying? Idris asked. Thesic straightened to his full height. And when he spoke, his voice carried the formal tones of an official declaration. I am going to recommend immediate acceptance of humanity's membership application, he said. Full military alliance with priority access to our technology and our star maps. And I am going to recommend that conquered forces begin training with human weapons and human tactics as soon as possible. He paused, and something that might have been a smile crossed his alien features. Arbiter Valkyrin does not make recommendations lightly, he said. When I speak, the Concord listens. Your species will have a place among the stars, Commander, and it will be a place of honor. Idris allowed herself a small smile of her own. We will try not to make you regret it, she said. Behind them, the lift doors opened. Sergeant Chen stepped onto the observation deck with a young Velthari officer close behind. The alien was holding a human pistol with careful curiosity, and Chen was explaining something in a patient voice. No, you have to brace for the kick, Chen said, adjusting the Velthari's grip. Use your whole body to absorb the recoil. It takes practice, but once you get used to it, the power is worth the effort. The Velthari officer nodded eagerly, clearly fascinated by the strange weapon in their hands, and Chen continued the impromptu lesson with the patience of someone who loved teaching their craft. Thesic watched the exchange with an expression of wonder. Your sergeant is teaching one of my officers to use your weapons, he said. That is what allies do, Idris replied. We share what we know. And we make each other stronger. The Arbiter was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was soft. When you first arrived, I asked you why your weapons had kickback, he said. I meant it as mockery, as a way to demonstrate how far behind us your species was. He turned to look at the stars once more, at the vast darkness that held both wonders and terrors beyond imagination. Now I understand that the kickback was never a flaw, he said. It was a promise. A promise that when your weapons spoke, something was going to fall and never rise again. Idris nodded slowly. The most advanced technology is not always the most elegant, she said. Sometimes it is just the one that makes the biggest hole. Behind them, Chen fired the pistol into a practice target, and the young Velthari officer jumped at the sound before laughing with delighted surprise. The galaxy was changing, and humanity was taking its first steps into a larger universe. The conquered had learned a valuable lesson today, a lesson written in fire and thunder and the relentless determination of a species that had crawled out of hell to reach the stars. Never underestimate the creatures who turned their own extinction into motivation, who made weapons from controlled explosions and refused to give up no matter how many times they were knocked down. The galaxy was about to discover what Earth had always known. Sometimes the most dangerous thing in the universe was not the biggest or the fastest or the most advanced. It was the one that simply would not stop.